Hello and welcome. Today we're going to step through a time lapse of a dining room table build that's a classic trestle style. So 2 posts and a center brace with a 6-foot tabletop. So the first step was some disassembly after dry fitting. Had to cut the post to length and then cut a notch in the top to receive the top board that mounts to the table itself. This was done over at the table saw. Just set the blade to the proper depth, 3/4 of an inch, and then a series of passes back and forth, cutting the notch halfway from each direction, inching over the fence little by little. A little bit of cleanup with the chisel. Make that notch able to receive the top board, which is shown here being marked out. Not entirely necessary here, just showing what parts get cut away. Over at the table saw, holding these boards straight up and down, as you'll see in a moment, those notches just get cut out. Could use a dado set, but got lazy here and just went for it with a single blade. Worked out fine. And with those notches cut, the posts fit in nicely, snap into place, provide a lot of stability. The next step here was to mark out for the mortise that each one of these 45 braces needs in order to attach to the trestle assembly. Centered, marked, and each one was individually placed, so it had to be specific to the brace that was being located at that position. Over with a little clamp setup and oscillating tool, just use that block to create a 90-degree cut and knock out those mortises with a little bit unconventional method. Seemed to work fine. Here's a dry fit of that setup, and I have to say it turned out really well. Was pleasantly surprised that all those fit in and all the surfaces mesh nicely. Here we're cutting some feet to length, the stringer, center stringer to length, and then cleaning up. This was basically just a glue lamb, so it's cleaning up the surface, and then here we're standing it up on end to cut the tenon. Took 2 passes to get this notch cut out in the vertical orientation, and then flip it down. Once the tall cut is made, flip it down on its side and make the shorter cut to remove the waste. Could have used a dado set here again with it oriented horizontally. That probably would have been safer, but again, got lazy with the setup and took my time with it. Was able to get it done this way. There's the tenon. Here a little bit of cleanup with the chisel. Help that socket together when it goes into final assembly. The next step here, putting in the mortise on the post, marking it out. I should have done this with both posts vertical. Instead I did them individually, and I had a little bit of an error that I had to correct later, but here's just fettling the pieces together and trying to get the tenon to actually drop in there. It does here in a moment, and actually turned out really well again. With all the mortise and tenon work complete, I was able to take apart the dry fits and cut some boards to length, so the top plate and the foot were cut to length. Then the foot gets a round over on the corner, so over at the bandsaw, just clip off that edge, hit it with a spindle sander, and then knock down any other saw marks with the sandpaper on a board. Switching gears here, I'll show you the method for cutting the saw marks into the board surfaces. So this is an old blade that has a leg screw epoxied to it. I have a brace there for added stability, and then when it's chucked up in the drill, you can just angle it relative to the surface slightly and pull it across at low speed. It creates those saw marks that don't look quite 100%, but they're not bad. And after that, it was on to sanding. Lots and lots of sanding. Knock down all those saw marks and just take off all the fuzz so that eventually when we get to staining that there isn't a lot of boogers sticking up everywhere. Had to remove all the pencil lines and everything, and here we are just adding a dark walnut stain to all the show surfaces, and it really makes those lines pop out, but actually those will all get covered up with paint here in a moment. It's kind of a multi-step process that went into this finish. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but this is Aspen, so it's a light wood, and adding this dark just makes it look more weathered when the final sanding and painting occurs, which you'll see in a moment here. All these surfaces end up getting several coats of paint, and that creates the effect of highlighting those saw marks with white rather than with the stain. So a lot of steps here in the finishing, like I said, and with each coat of paint, ultimately most of it gets sanded off. So it was a little bit of a back and forth with in terms of felt like you're making progress, but then you weren't. And here we are at that sanding stage. We're hitting it with a rough sandpaper first to knock down most of that paint, just leaving the deepest portions with the white. And I have to tell you, this got to me. I had to take a break here, so you'll see me take a nap here in a moment. But after that, back at it, refreshed, ready to go. Knocked out that sanding. It actually, it's pretty nice. As you go, you kind of see the final product being revealed, almost like a giant scratch-off ticket. Though not nearly as lucrative. So it just kept going. The sanding seemed to never end with each little piece. Every show face needed to be addressed, but finally got to the point where we could clean it up, blow off all the dust, and then head over to final finishing. Using a polyacrylic water-based finish here for the first couple coats. As with any woodworking project, a lot of rinse and repeat. So everything got one coat and then sanded, and then got a second coat and sanded again. I think I ended up doing 3 coats of polyacrylic on everything, and I'm just using a chip brush on all this because it's, I don't know, kind of the easy way to go. The final sanding prior to the last coat here, just dusted that with a real fine grit sandpaper. So nearly done with the polyacrylic coats here, and then we can move into final assembly. Final glue ups are always fun. Get to see the final product come to fruition. And so this was a multi-step process, taking each of the trestle assemblies. I started at the top, drew that up tight with some clamps, and then set about squaring that top plate, which is where the table mounts to, and just cinching down at a 45 there on each one of those. Had to get creative with a bar clamp here to pull that one side in to get it square, but worked out fine. Here's another angle of that same thing, set up to the other leg. Those notches help draw everything nice and tight and drawn together. A lot of squaring and checking back and forth, cleaning up glue, because these were all finished surfaces at the end. I didn't want to have any dried glue, which would pull off the finish. And then onto the other side a couple days later, the foot side or the base side. Rinse and repeat. This was a lot easier because of course the top was already set up there and could just clamp against. A lot of cleanup, get all that squeeze out of there so it doesn't harden and yellow the surface at all. It's always satisfying watching the final clamps go together, knowing that the end result is near. Turned out well, I think. Everything closed up nicely. So taking it out of the clamps, here I'm doing some branding that'll go on the bottom of the foot, which will also cover up that tenon hole that's on the base of the assembly. And moving into final assembly of all the finished pieces here. Took a little bit to convince this to go together, but ultimately went together. Put the top in place, centered it, and then went about clamping those together, drawing it up. There was a little bit of bow that had to come out, and then I'm just adding a couple of screw holes here on each far end of the top support to draw that nicely down into the trestle legs. And then a final sanding. I ended up going with the Bona hardwood flooring finish as my final coat on the top. This is a two-part mixture. It's a water-based product that I guess it just provides that extra layer of protection for the plates and cups and utensils that'll inevitably be scratching the surface. I was able to coat all the top, the sides, and then the bottom edge, the edge that's thickened all the way around. So all the major wear surfaces got this additional protection. We're getting to the end here. The last step was to glue in those plugs for the feet and cap off that opening. So that's it. Here are a couple of finished shots of the end product. Let me know what you think of the saw marks. Let me know what you think of the general build. I'd love to hear your comments, questions about any of the processes. Thank you for watching.